10,000 East Berliners with them. So they staged a massive rally in front of this building, and then they called for a work stoppage the next day. So on the 17th of June 1953, there was a work stoppage. Okay, call out as soon as you see it. I want you to tell me the difference between, this is a photograph of this building right after it was completed in 1936. What's the difference between the way it looks now and the way it looked then? That's what it looked like then.
The statue.
Yeah, with the swastikas and the eagles. Yeah. So essentially, it's the same building. It survived the bombing of Berlin. If you look at the far end, the stonework is a little bit of a different color down there. There was a little bit of damage down there. But essentially, this building survived the war. And as you can see, again, this is very typical of Albert Speer's architecture. Clean lines, neoclassic, but also domineering, imposing, strong.
It's unfriendly in a sense because you kind of get pushed back. You know, it's the clean surface, and there's no warmth and nothing.
Yeah. No. So, 1935, Adolf Hitler tore up the Treaty of Versailles, which I told you before did not allow Germany to have anything other than a tiny army and a tiny navy and no motorized air force. And as soon as he tore up that treaty, the Germans began building fighters and bombers and rearming, and Hitler needed somebody to manage all of that. So he turned to the man who was already the head of the Prussian police force, Hermann Göring, and he named him head of his new Luftwaffe, head of the Air Force, and head of rearmament. Rearmament. So Göring is actually wearing 3 hats in this new administration, 3 important jobs. He needed a lot of office space, and he came down to this end of Wilhelmstrasse with Albert Speer. There were some old government buildings here, and he said, tear them down and then build me a ministry. And he put a provision in the contract. He wanted this building completed in time for the 1936 Olympics. So Speer had 18 months to plan, design, and build this building. And he got the job done in 18 months. Actually, for the 1936 Olympics, the Nazis cleaned up their act a lot. They let a lot of people out of the camps. They took down all of the anti-Semitic banners and slogans around town. But they also printed a brochure for international visitors. And in that brochure was this photograph.
Okay.
But it had a caption under it. And the caption read, "This building is a monument carved in stone to the reawakened fighting spirit of Germany." So 1936, Adolf Hitler was already on the warpath. He knew exactly where he was taking this country. No question in my mind. So as I told you, this building at the end of the war was used by the East German government until 1956. They moved out. They turned it over to their commission for planning. I don't know what that was. But it was used that way until the wall came down. And when the wall came down, the reunified German government had a huge problem with real estate issues. If you think about it, in East Germany, the government owned everything. And suddenly people were showing up from all around the world with documents claiming this house or this farm or this piece of land belonged to my family since whenever. Somebody had to decide who owned what. So the government created an organization called the Treuhand, and their job was to deal with those real estate issues. And they were housed in here. They finished up their work in 1994. They moved out. And then it was decided to do a rolling refurbishment of the building. So they started at this end, working down here at this end. They finished about 6 years ago. Once they got started, they realized that a building that was put up in 18 months was not very well constructed. So the cost overruns were huge. I mean, I think over 100%. They would have been better off just tearing it down and starting over from scratch. But they finished the job.
Historical building. It's a historical building.
Yes.
I imagine they couldn't do that.
No. Now they couldn't do it. When they were doing the reconstruction, they did find one part of the building that was very well constructed. The air raid shelters down in the basement. So apparently,
that's
Mr.
where they
Göring,
started.
apparently, Mr. Göring had a pretty good idea of what Berlin But Hermann Göring made a really stupid mistake. Right after the beginning of the war, I think it was the end of 39, beginning 40, in a radio address to the German people, Hermann Göring actually said, as the head of your new Air Force, I give you my promise, if a single foreign bomb ever falls on the city of Berlin, you can call me Mr. Meyer. Meyer was a very common Jewish name. And toward the end of the war, down in the air raid shelters during the heavy bombardments, people sarcastically referred to Göring as Meyer.
He shouldn't have said that.
No, he
Backfired
shouldn't
on
have.
him, huh?
He shouldn't have. I had a friend of mine send me a really interesting quote by Göring. I can't give it to you verbatim, but I give you the flavor of it. This is Göring, and he's talking obviously to a group of his closest associates, and he's talking about how you get people to go to war. And what he said essentially was, what poor slob working on a farm somewhere wants to go to war because I say so, when about the best he can hope for is to return to his little piece of land alive and in one piece. The only way to get him to go is to make him believe he's under threat of attack himself.
Oh, yeah.
Also applies.
They just
I think,
knew what to say.
today's-
Yeah. Well, it seems like it still works
Yeah, it does.
in a lot of places. In a lot of countries.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
We're going to go to the other end of the building here. I'm going to show you a photograph of what this building looked like at the end of the war. And then I'm going to talk some about what I call the mystery of this tour. So let's go down here.
You know where Göring's office was in here?
At the end of the First World War, before he turned himself into a alcohol or a drug-addicted fat pig, he wasn't a bad-looking guy.
Huh?
Oh, yeah. And what profession did he have before? What education, do you know?
Metzger.
He looks like one, doesn't he? Like a butcher, but I don't know.
No.
He was a painter.
A painter. Yeah, I think he was a painter.
Was he as
What?
talented as Hitler?
Huh?
So this
Oh, look, the trapeze are coming.
You have to take us back into,
So this is what this building looked like at the end of the war. You can see, first of all, how large it is.
Yes.
And then you can also see that it
It's
suffered...
this whole complex here.
Yeah,
All this.
you can see that it suffered relatively little bomb damage. And
That's
when I
crazy.
first started to do the tour, I noticed that in photographs, every building that you and I would consider an important building in the Third Reich basically survived the bombing of Berlin, but what you see is some roof damage, but nothing more. And nobody could explain that to me, so I started to put it out as a question on the tour. Thought maybe one of my guests would know. And very early on, I had a retired American Air Force general on the tour. And he said, well, we didn't have good precision bombing back then.
No.
But that was really a stupid answer.
Yeah.
Because
It's
everybody
over the
knows
top,
that the
yeah.
British and the Americans did what was called carpet bombing. They picked a sector of the city, and just every plane that flew over dropped their bombs in that square. There wasn't any specific targeting of
I think it was an order
buildings.
to say that. You know?
But
Save it.
suppose there would have been specific targeting of buildings. Do you think you could have spotted that building from the air?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
I think it would have been
so.
fairly easy.
Should be
No.
blind not to.
That was not the answer.
Yeah, but it was an order, you know,
Yeah.
not to bomb it.
No,
Every day.
no, not at all. Because they didn't exclude anything and they didn't specifically bomb anything. They just dumped their bombs.
Still, you said it wasn't constructed all that well, so if they had